Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Planning Committee meeting. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Membership of the committee is as listed in the agenda. Just one moment, my agenda hasn't got names in it. Have you got a hard copy? Sorry about that. Is as listed in the agenda. Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Greco should be here shortly, and Councillor Lawrence is on an approved leave of absence and is an apology this evening. Disclosures of conflicts of interest. Are there any disclosures? No? Thank you. Item 4 is confirmation of the minutes of Planning Committee meeting held on the 25th of June 2018. Councillor Messina.
Can we just check the date? Oh, sorry. Can we check the date of the Planning Committee meeting? Because I don't think that's correct, the 23rd of June 2018.
25th of June.
Mine says the 23rd.
On your agenda?
Yes, it does.
Oh, okay. The agenda I've got is the 25th of June and the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting is the 25th of June. Okay, so would someone like to move a motion that says June the 25th so that we're moving the right minutes? That's moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? Motion is carried. Moving now to consideration of reports. 5.1 is application for a planning permit at 37 to 47 McFadzean Avenue Reservoir. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is proposed to construct a mixed-use development comprising a 3-storey building, which is known as Block A, and a 2-storey building, Block B, containing 8 dwellings, 4 shops and 1 takeaway food premises. Each dwelling has been provided with a double garage, while the shops and takeaway food premises are allocated 1 car space each. Vehicle access to the site is via the adjoining laneway, which separates the site from the residential area to the west. The proposal seeks a reduction of 8 car spaces made up of 1 residential visitor and 7 customer car spaces. The site is zoned Commercial 1 zone and is affected by the Development Contributions Plan overlay. There is no restrictive covenant registered on title for the subject land. The application was advertised and 9 objections were received as summarised and responded to on pages 12 to 15 of the agenda. The proposal for a multi-level mixed-use development has strong planning policy support and demonstrates compliance with relevant planning policy, including the Darebin Economic Land Use Strategy, which nominates the site for residential above retail, and Clause 22.06 of the Darebin Planning Scheme. A reduction of visitor and customer car parking spaces is considered acceptable in this location, given the requirement for the existing large vehicle crossovers to McFadzean Avenue to be removed and additional 90-degree car parking spaces, which will total a minimum of 6 to be provided at cost to the developer. Approval is recommended subject to conditions outlined on pages 3 to 10 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now call on Andrew West to speak on behalf of the applicant. I'd just like to take a seat down here. You will have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, thanks for the opportunity to speak. This has actually been quite a long application for our client, and we've actually made a number of concessions to get to this point. It was actually substantially higher density than the application originally than what you actually see now. So we've worked closely with council officers to try and get an outcome that's to the satisfaction of the council, and we acknowledge the issues that have been raised, and we feel that we've actually made a number of concessions which deem the development appropriate. These concessions include separating the apartments above the shops. When we originally lodged them, there was more of a continuous build form on the upper levels. We've now stepped those upper levels back, and you'll notice on the elevations for the plans that there's actually some separation in between the upper levels. So when you look up, there's not just a one solid bulk, there's actually some space in between the upper levels. The number of townhouses has also been reduced, and after a lot of consultation with council, we actually changed the access to have that off the rear laneway. Originally we had that off Broadhurst. So we feel that we've made a number of concessions. We've attempted to address the corner from a commercial perspective. We've also changed the facade quite considerably in response to some of the concerns that were raised by council officers. And with respect to the townhouses, we've also tried to make them address the street and make more of a transition in between the commercial and the residential area. So the intent is that it actually steps down and there's a transition between the commercial and the residential. So I think rather than sort of go over everything that's already written in the report, we're supportive of the council officer's recommendation we're grateful for the cooperation we've received so far, and we're respectfully seeking council's support, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We don't normally do questions, so I'll just ask you to take your seat back in the gallery. Thank you. We have 2 objectors listed to speak against this application, so I'll call on Dimity O'Donnell first. Yep. So you have 5 minutes in total, so you can have...
James is going to go first.
Oh, that's fine. So James White, did you...
Yeah.
Yes? I don't mind the order. Yep, okay. So you have 2.5 minutes each. Yep.
Thanks again for the opportunity to speak this evening. And I'd just firstly like to say, whilst myself and local residents still appreciate...
Could you please speak into the microphone so that we can hear? Yeah.
Sure, thank you. So I just wanted to say, whilst myself and local residents do appreciate some of the concessions that have been made based on what was initially proposed for the site, we do still have some significant concerns. But we do support generally the redevelopment of the site. I'd just like to give a snapshot of the main objections that were made in writing. So firstly, the scale of the development, traffic and the local neighbourhood design presents a significant increase in vehicle traffic to the local area. The commercial dwellings with the proposal will increase by 50%, as would the business activity and traffic if it's to proceed as it's intended. 3 stories is not in keeping with the local design, and it will increase traffic and parking demands in the local area. The commercial zone is small compared with the surrounding predominantly residential zone. Car parking is another key area. The area is already faced with the issue of what I would call inadequate parking, and a number of residents regularly comment on this on a day-to-day basis. Barry Street and McFadzean Avenue are regularly overcrowded from on-street parking, so much so that it's like a single lane of traffic sometimes all the way up to High Street. The reduction of parking on the site of 8 spaces is significant. The 6 new proposed spaces is not adequate to accommodate the parking and traffic needs of the activity that would be generated by both the commercial and residential dwellings. And public safety and local amenity. Edgar's Creek Reserve is accessed by pedestrians and cyclists, many people of all ages. I watch kids as old as my own, primary school age, making their way down to the park by themselves on a regular basis.
We're at time now, so if you'd just like to wrap up this last point.
Sure thing. The laneway is the main access point to the site, and it will bring more vehicle traffic between Barry Street and Broadhurst Avenue. This will need to be monitored closely, presents a genuine risk for the safety of those going to the reserve. And finally, just myself and my neighbour at the rear, just a concern about loss of privacy overlooking our properties. The balconies should have permanently fixed solid screening above 1.7 metres, we feel would be appropriate, above what's being proposed, and windows should have permanently fixed frosting above the 1.7 metres, and they shouldn't open to provide vision upon the neighbouring properties.
Thank you. I'll have to ask you to stop then. Thank you very much for your submission. I'll now call on Dimity O'Donnell.
Thanks, James. Thanks to Council. I'm Dimity. Sorry, the mic. Thank you very much. Hi. So, like James, I'd like to make it clear to the committee that we don't actually object to the development of the site per se. It would be nice for the site to change from a vacant lot to something that contributes to the neighbourhood. We're not immediate neighbours, myself and my husband. We actually live 10 houses down from the proposed development on Broadhurst Avenue. So we're not impacted by overshadowing, etc. However, we do strongly object to the size and the scale of the proposed development of three stories containing 8 apartments plus shops. 8 apartments on this site is a significant departure from the neighbourhood's character and represents a considerably more intensive use of land in the area. There's nothing in this area that is any way similar to the proposed development in scale or size. The current neighbourhood character is largely single-storey houses and are typically single dwellings. This is largely, most of you would know, due to the existence of the single dwelling covenants in this area, which only permit one dwelling on each lot on their land titles. I've noticed actually we did put in a written submission, however, the point of the covenants is not actually in the, what was it called, the consideration of reports in the agenda before you, so I'd just like to quickly go through what that issue is. We're very concerned, so myself and my husband are very concerned about the potential impact on the integrity of the single dwelling covenants on the area. We've had some experience in this matter recently. What we understand now is that when an applicant to modify a covenant to allow a multi-dwelling development such as this comes to the Supreme Court, the court has regards to a number of factors, and one of these is the extent and scale of development that's already existing in the area. Developers point to development in the area to argue to the Supreme Court that the covenants are now obsolete. Not only is it likely that a development of this scale and size, as currently proposed, will be pointed to in support of future applications to modify the single dwelling covenants in the Supreme Court, but that's actually already happening. That is already being referred to as it is now, even in its planning stage. So this isn't something that we're speculating on, this is actually already occurring. The point is that if this development is allowed through at this scale, it will make future covenant modifications in the area likely to succeed, which has far-reaching implications for this neighbourhood, something that maybe the applicant's not aware of. As myself and Kevin understand it, Darebin Council is committed to preserving this particular area, the neighbourhood character, by classifying it as a minimal housing change in the Darebin Housing Strategy, the Darebin Planning. It's your documents, I won't go through them. I realise that the land for the proposed development is zoned as commercial, but it does sit within a minimal housing change area. My understanding, the houses next door, say for example on Broadhurst Avenue, are all single dwelling covenants, and they are also on the other side of the road on Broadhurst Avenue.
We'll just get you to wrap up now, thanks.
Absolutely. So in summary, we would like to see the site developed. The current proposal will impact the immediate neighbours and the wider neighbourhood by undermining the integrity of the covenants, which currently protect the neighbourhood character that the Darebin Council has designated a minimal housing change area. Therefore, we request that the Council limit their approval for the development of this site to 2 storeys and fewer residential dwellings. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your submission.
Thanks.
Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. Through to the officers, could you please expand on the issue that that Dimity spoke about the covenants and development?
Yes, Madam Chair. With regard to the covenant, the title that affects this site doesn't have that covenant located on it. It's generally in the residential area. It may be that that's taken into consideration as part of a future decision on another lot, but that would have to be based on the application's merits rather than this application. Thank you.
Councillor Greco.
I just had a question in relation to parking,
Yes.
if I may, just through you, Mayor, to the officers. I see in the application that there's they're seeking a reduction of 8 car spaces, but also I see in the application that 6 car spaces have been created as a result of doing away with the with the various driveways associated with the former petrol station. So I'm just trying to get a fix on the number. So because we're creating 6, but there's a waiver of 8, can you just elaborate on that?
Yes, Madam Chair. With regard to the car parking, you're correct. There will be a proposal for a requirement through condition for 6 car parking spaces to be provided on street, where the current vehicle access ways are. So that in effect would result in a waiver of 2 car parking spaces to be sought as part of this application.
Councillor Rennie.
Yes, thank you through you, Mayor Surf. With respect to potential use of the shop fronts, what uses would require a planning permit? And do you anticipate any particular uses so that we might make an assessment about the adequacy of car parking?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the proposed shop use and the takeaway food premises uses, they don't actually require planning permission for the use, but where they do come in as far as this consideration is concerned is the car parking rates. They've been provided with 1 car parking spot per tenancy, and that's allocated to the staff.
Thank you. And just to follow up, I noted in the conditions that it's requested that cafe be changed to takeaway food premises. Why is that?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's just based on the fact that a cafe isn't a defined use in the planning scheme.
Councillor Greco.
I just had a supplementary question to the previous question. I just want to be absolutely clear, because in the report it states that the proposal seeks a reduction of 8 car spaces. So how does that reconcile? Just to understand, how does that reconcile with what was previously said?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the reduction is for 8, but they have to provide 6 on-street car parking spaces. So in effect, you're left over with 2 spaces that they're seeking to reduce all up. But
just a supplement. But we're formally granting a waiver of 8 spaces. Is that?
We are formally with the requirement to have 6 spaces on the street. Thank you.
Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Rennie.
Yes.
I'd like to move a...
So Councillor Rennie has another question.
Oh, please.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just hoping that you could give us some clarity about what overlooking treatments have been proposed to the west on windows and balconies. If you could give some detail, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'll refer to condition 1.0 on page 4 of the agenda. That does ask for the first floor west-facing bedroom 1 windows of dwellings 6, 7 and 8 to be provided with sill heights, fixed screens or fixed obscure glazing to 1.7 metres in height, and that's in accordance with Res Code provisions. And other than that, the ground floor doesn't have any requirements for screening, and the upper floor shown on that elevation, the western elevation, is for the 3-storey element, which is pushed much further towards McFadzean Avenue.
Okay, Councillor Greco.
Yeah, I'd like to move an alternate motion, if that...
Yes, if you could read it out.
I'll read it out for the benefit of councillors and the gallery. That council issue a notice of refusal with grounds as follows. 1, the proposed development does not meet the purpose of the commercial 1 zone, nor the intent of clause 21.04 economic development of the planning scheme, of the Darebin planning scheme, proposing an unequal distribution of uses favouring residential over commercial. 2, the proposal has not been designed in accordance with clause 22.06, which is multi-residential and mixed-use development of the Darebin planning scheme in terms of sustainability and design and materials. 3, the number of car parking spaces provided is not in accordance with the requirements of clause 52.06 car parking of the Darebin planning scheme. And 4, the height, visual bulk and form of the development across the site is incompatible with the prevailing single-storey and open rear yard character of dwellings in Broadhurst Avenue.
Okay, that's moved by Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder? Councillor Newton.
Happy to second.
Councillor Greco, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just very briefly, councillors, Look, this particular site, I think we really welcome development in this site here. It's been a bit of an eyesore, and I think we would all agree that it has been a bit of an eyesore for the last few years in terms of there used to be a petrol station there, now it's been a vacant block of land for quite some time. It represents about 50% of that shopping strip in that particular area. So it's quite a significant development in relative terms in relation to that particular shopping strip. What we see here is that it's predominantly, if you like, a residential development. Yeah. There are 8 dwellings, only 4 shops and 1 takeaway food shop. So when you view that development, even though it's in a commercial zone, it's predominantly a residential dwelling. So even though it's a commercial zone, the residential aspect is quite dominant in relation to it. Also, as has been mentioned and clarified, that the car parking reduction is for 8 cars, and when you look at that in relation to, as I mentioned, the doubling of that business area, and the number of shops that are going to be introduced as a result of this development, it will have a significant impact in regards to that area. We're not talking about one particular commercial store being opened which can possibly be absorbed, but we're talking about 100% increase of what's already there in terms of car and traffic and parking movement. Also, the fourth point I think that is really that needs to be mentioned, and I think that some of the people from some of the residents have picked up, is about the height of the building. If you look at that particular strip of shopping, there's a rhyme and rhythm associated with that, which is essentially a two-storey premises, and what's been proposed here is actually a 3-storey building, which does not link back to the residential nature of the area, and I acknowledge that it is a commercial zone, but I go back to the point that even though it is a commercial zone, it's predominantly a development that has very much a residential characteristic about it. So in light of that, I think it represents the height and the bulk are really incompatible with the rhyme and reason, with the rhyme and rhythm of the area, and if you like, the character of the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'd like to second everything that Councillor Greco said. For me, I'd also like to see a renewal of this area, and I would like to see something on the site. I think that having some dwellings there would help with passive surveillance and with safety and security. But I agree with Councillor Greco that this is a commercial site and we're looking at 8 dwellings, as he said. We had one of these recently in Mendip Avenue where it was just a tiny shop front and the rest was residential. We knocked that back as well. And I also think that it sets a bit of a dangerous precedent, particularly with what the resident was saying about the covenants, which I'm concerned about. And I agree with Councillor Greco about the issue of height as well. So, yeah, I'd like to see something on the site, but I think this is an overdevelopment.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Rennie.
Yes, with apologies for not asking a couple of questions earlier, I do seek clarification on a couple more points. If I
Okay, so we're not speaking to the motion. We're going to ask some more questions. Yep.
Yes, please. Can I just get confirmation that the cost of delivering the extra 6 spots on the street will be covered by the developer?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Thank you. And with regards to 3 stories, if an owner of a single dwelling on one of the sites with a covenant wanted to replace their dwelling with a single dwelling that was 3 stories in height, would that be allowable in this area?
Sorry, with regard to a covenant on another site?
I'm just talking about generally, what does the area allow in
What's the height limit?
What is the height limit?
I see.
If someone, presumably to replace one dwelling with another, they wouldn't actually need a planning permit, they'd only need a building permit. Would 3 stories be allowable?
In the surrounding zone, which is a general residential zone, they could have a 3-storey dwelling with a maximum height of 11 metres.
Thank you.
So could you repeat that? So I didn't, in the surrounding zone?
Yes, in the surrounding zone, the general residential zone, you could have a 3-storey building with a maximum height of 11 metres.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie, would you like to now speak to the motion?
Yes, I will. Thank you. I'm going to speak against this motion for a number of reasons. I think that it is actually a reasonable proposition on a block of land this size, and there is nothing in the planning scheme that would prohibit three-storey development in this whole area if that's what people chose to do with their blocks. And I think that's important, that just because at the moment it is predominantly single-storey, people who own a property in the area could take down that property and replace it with a three-storey house, and they would not need a planning permit to do that. They would only need a building permit. And that's the context within which I'm considering 3 storeys, that this is significantly under the 11 metres that is allowable under the general residential zone, which covers this area. In addition, I think the fact that this isn't a single block form and it is actually 2 buildings reflects the fact that it's not a massive built form. It's, I don't think, an overdevelopment. I think there's been care to make sure the dwellings on the west side are only double-storey so that you don't have the third storey up against the single storey which is further west. And I think it's actually quite a clever response to a commercial zone in the area. I note also that we often have community members who talk about how they want more 3-storey dwellings, that there's not enough. It's a very common narrative we hear about the need for 3-storey dwellings for bigger homes, and that is actually being delivered here. This is not a 3-storey apartment building with a whole lot of 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings. These are family homes that are being offered in an area that is highly desirable for people to live in. And I think the fact that this development would not only see 5 shop fronts, but 8 family homes for people who would very much like to live in this neighbourhood and become part of this community is an important thing, and I think it's worth supporting.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
This is a tricky situation because looking at this street, it is absolutely the case, as was identified by the residents, that all the streets, all the houses in the surrounding area are single-storey, detached, with the exception of a couple of shops in the other side of the commercial zone. However, the challenge remains that it's the role of council to assess the compliance of the proposals, which is different from assessing whether we think it's ideal for an area, and it's quite clear here that this is compliant. We have a maximum height of 11 metres. In this case, it's 9.7, as was raised by Councillor Rennie. Other residents could build a 3-storey house up to 11 metres without necessarily needing a permit. It does add extra shops and maybe a cafe or takeaway place to the area. And we've seen in the media recently reports of the rapidly rising house prices in Reservoir, with Preston already going over a median of $1 million per house, and Reservoir heading the same way. So I think having decent-sized apartments in Reservoir that might be a bit more affordable is something that I suppose I support as a principle for people to have access to affordable housing. So I think I'm going to, I intend to vote against the motion put forward by Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers?
I think I do have a right.
Councillor Greco, would you like the right of reply?
Yeah, look, just very briefly. Look, the councillors have raised some relevant points, I would say, but I think we have to appreciate that whilst there is the potential to build 3-storey dwellings, that we still have to go through a planning approval process, and it doesn't mean that they would
I just have to stop you there, because that's not the advice that the officers gave us. They'd need to go through a building permit, but not a planning permit. Proposal to build a 3-storey dwelling, a single dwelling on one of those blocks. Sorry.
Could you repeat that, ma'am?
The advice that the officers. The advice that the officers gave us was that on one of the general residential zoned dwellings, someone could knock down the current dwelling and build a single dwelling that was 3 storeys without a planning permit. So that's just to clarify, because you said you didn't say that. I just wanted to make that clear.
If I may, just to...
Yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify that because that was factually incorrect.
Just to clarify that further, if we may. So, but if it's a multiple dwelling application, would the same apply?
No, well, the covenant is on those sites, so it couldn't be. But if it was a single dwelling being replaced by a single dwelling, then they could do that.
Yeah, but this is not a single dwelling replacement.
But you just made the argument that it couldn't happen on other sites, so I just wanted to correct that.
Well, thanks for clarifying
Yeah.
that.
We'll start the clock. We'll start the clock now. Sorry.
Yeah. So, given that we're not talking about a single dwelling on a single site, here we have multiple dwellings on a very large site. So, and therefore, context becomes very important in relation to how these particular sites are assessed. Given, as has been stated, that there are predominantly single-storey developments around that location, it's probably inappropriate to have a three-storey development of eight units on that site.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. Councillor Rennie?
I'd like to put a motion that we follow the council officer recommendation that the application be supported.
Okay. So that's moved by Councillor Rennie and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief because I've said a few things. But when I looked at these plans, I actually think that they meet many of the kind of requirements that we're often looking for when people are developing sites. The dwellings are sizable, there's various spaces, there's often 2 living areas in these dwellings. They have adequate parking for the dwellings, notwithstanding the waiver of parking for the shop fronts. And I think they've actually got a lot to recommend them, because so often we see developments that are proposing a whole lot of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. As I said before, these are homes that I think families will enjoy and appreciate, and I think those families will move into this area. Every area changes over time. There's not a city in history that has survived without change and evolution. We talk about how slight increases in density can make enormous differences in terms of the viability of delivering services and infrastructure, for example, better public transport. There may actually be things that come to this neighbourhood as a result of a development like this that actually bring benefit to the whole neighbourhood, and I think that's worth thinking about.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, it's already been mentioned, and I thank, of course, both the applicant and the objectors for their submissions, which were very informative, and appreciate the time that went into that. It's already been mentioned that this is compliant, so this is not a question about compliance or non-compliance. We need to deal with the laws that we have in front of us, both the state laws and also the local planning environment that we deal with. I would just follow on from Councillor Rennie's point and say that in relation to this site, I think Councillor Greco actually makes a very valid point, which is that context matters. But context also matters the other way, which is that as a result of this development being approved, some of the concerns that I've heard this evening, and I do know the site quite well, I go through there on a regular basis, we are not going to see the floodgates open in terms of development at this site. It's just not what's going to happen. This is not the first in a domino effect, and we need to be aware of what that actually would be, which would be the lifting of the single dwelling covenant, which would actually see significant change. I don't think that the single dwelling covenant is the factor in this, and then certainly it's actually not a consideration that we can make a planning decision on. And so I would encourage both the objectors and the applicant to keep talking, obviously. I'm obviously confident that this will be approved. What I'm also confident about, though, is that this is, as Councillor Rennie pointed out, an appropriate development compared to what else could have gone there. And it's actually a positive outcome in terms of the use of the land. There is also an opportunity here to think about how, with a corner site like this and a significant site, it is equivalent to two whole blocks or more in that area. It becomes a little bit of a feature, but it is not going to dominate, and I think that's the important thing. The 3-storey height limit is part of the state planning scheme. It is not part of the Darebin planning scheme that ability comes through. So people need to be aware of that, and thanks again.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Madam Mayor, I drove out there last night and I had a look at the block and its surrounding landscape and looked at the townhouses across near O'Connor Street and down McPherson Avenue. And I look at this development and I think, if we were to reject this planning application, how would it be looked at in terms of going to VCAT? Will there be a yes or a no? And I look at precedents and I look at the diversity of the apartments in terms of the family units, and I look at double garages, I look at study nooks, I look at retreats where the bedrooms are. I also note that what I would like to see, is an anti-graffiti management plan on the south elevation side, but I guess we're not going to get that at the moment. So I'm satisfied that I think if we were to refuse that, VCAT would approve this. So on that basis, I have to move the motion to approve the development.
Thank you. Councillor Greco?
Yeah, look, if I may, I'd like to offer an amendment to the motion. There's two parts to it, include two additional conditions. Condition R would read the deletion of the second floor of dwellings 1 to 5. The condition S would read modification in accordance with a car park management plan, refer to condition number 27 of this permit, and include condition 27 to read, before the development commences, a car park management plan covering matters of access and safety and impacts on residential amenity must be prepared to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. When approved, the car park management plan will be endorsed and will then form part of this permit. The car parking area must be constructed, maintained and managed in good working order and in accordance with the requirements / recommendations of the car parking management plan to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. And obviously, due to the above conditions, the following revision to the recommendation will also be required. That is condition 1S, the use of render at the first, and we'll read that the use of render at the first floors reduced in favour of durable and high quality materials to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. So it's two additional conditions, essentially. One has got to do with a car parking management plan, and the other condition will be the removal of the second floor of dwellings 1 to 5.
Does the mover accept that amendment?
I'm willing to accept one but not the other. Is that possible to deal with them separately?
Yeah, we can split them.
Yes, so I'd accept the one in relation to the car parking plan and the render that Councillor Greco made mention
Okay,
of.
so we'll deal with the revised condition 1S, the modification in accordance with a car park management plan. Does the seconder support that?
I just want to check through you to the officers to make sure the wording is correct on that we're not doing something that's ultra-virus.
Officers?
Yes, Madam Chair, the wording is correct.
Yep, that's on that basis. That's fine.
So you accept that, so we can incorporate that into the original motion. So condition 1R, which is the deletion of the second floor of dwellings 1 to 5, and then the change to 1S to delete and second, you do not accept?
I do not accept that one.
Okay.
Oh, I'm desperately looking for a second.
Okay, would anyone want to... Councillor Greco will move those proposed changes as an amendment. Is there a seconder for that amendment?
I'm happy to second.
That's second by Councillor Newton. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak to the amendment?
Yeah, just very briefly. Look, I thank Councillor Newton to second in the motion. It just gives an opportunity to talk about what's been proposed here. Look, the development is we all understand that there needs to be development of that site, and it's good that a proposal has come through. In my discussions with the officers, and if you look at the development, the top floor, which is the third floor, if you like, can easily be removed from a design perspective, because what the top floor is, that third floor, is essentially just one large box that sits above the the 2 floors underneath it, creating one large master bedroom with some other sort of entertainment area. So those large boxes, those 5 large boxes that sit on top of the development facing McFadden Avenue, could easily be removed, and this proposal would be quite acceptable, I think, and quite a presentable application and proposal that's been put forward. So I urge councillors to think about that, and that we can actually endorse the application, and but with a 2-storey, basically 2-storey limit to it, and I think that it would actually help to alleviate some of the other issues that are associated with this development in relation to parking and excess parking issues, and some of the traffic management issues that may be associated with that area there. So I urge councillors to really think hard about it, and I think that this could be a way forward in relation to this application.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Melissa. Just very briefly, we do have advice that removing 1 level is practical and possible, and I do think that there are concerns about traffic that it would be useful to have an updated car parking management plan.
Okay, are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy?
I'll just speak against this. Obviously, we've incorporated the car parking management plan element and the render. I think were both incorporated already in the substantive motion, so they're not up for debate. We've grappled with this before in this chamber about whether we should consider deleting a floor of a development or not. And generally, the practice has been to not go down that path because of the issues that it brings about the integrity of the design, and sometimes, whilst it may seem simple to do, it's generally something that we've only considered in any detail when we've talked about much taller buildings where it's not one dwelling, it's actually about the yield rather than about the actual design of the building. So I can't support deleting a floor for a whole range of reasons, but the main one being that you're actually impacting on the actual design of a whole structure, and you're better off refusing if you're not happy with the height. 3 stories is a right as part of this development, and we need to be respectful to the planning scheme, even if we don't agree with every element of it. So on that basis, I can't support that amendment.
Councillor Rennie?
Similarly, I won't support this amendment, and there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, we talk a lot about wanting to see more 3-bedroom dwellings in Darebin. It's highly demanded by our residents. People are constantly getting onto us and saying we're seeing too many developments that are 1 and 2 bedroom. The deletion of that 2nd floor effectively takes the master bedroom out of all of these dwellings, and so what you're left with is little apartments with 2 bedrooms, which is precisely what we've been told over and over again people don't want to see. The other thing is that in terms of design, I've got my plans here. I've covered up that 3rd story, and now I'm looking at the building, and aesthetically, it looks pretty terrible without the 3rd story. The 3rd story is broken up, so it's not a block form when you take it off, or the 2nd story rather when you take it off. I've got a pretty ordinary looking building in front of me that I think actually aesthetically is much more problematic. And so I think in agreement with what Councillor McCarthy said, trying to redesign buildings in the chamber is not a good idea, and I think that type of redesign would actually be to the detriment of this development.
Could I just seek some clarification?
Yeah.
I just wonder if we could get some clarification from our officers in relation to how the integrity of the building will be affected by removing a floor. Why I asked that, because I sought some advice from our officers.
Okay, we'll get them to respond.
In relation to that point before.
Officers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the integrity of the building, it wouldn't have any impact on the ability for it to function as a dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. So we'll go back to the substantive, and we've heard from the mover and the seconder and Councillor Messina. So are there any further speakers to this substantive motion? No. I'll then put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried. The planning committee has decided to grant the planning permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. Objectors have 21 days in which to lodge an appeal with VCAT, and the applicant has 60 days. Notice detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant in the next week. We'll move now on to application for a planning permit at 43 to 47 Simpson Street, Northcote. Officers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just by way of history, we're dealing with a site here that has had a previous approval, and I'll explain that there was a permit supported by VCAT in 2013. That application was expired following Council's refusal to extend the extension of time, and the reason for refusing the extension to the last planning permit was because since that time the better apartment provisions came in and there is an assessment against that criteria. So I just wanted to explain that at the outset. The proposal before you this evening responds better to clause 58. It offers, similar to the previous approval, 4 stories in a mixed-use configuration. It includes 19 dwellings and 2 commercial premises. The 19 apartments are made up of 12 2-bedroom dwellings and 7 3-bedroom dwellings. The commercial floor spaces have an area of 164 and 143 square metres respectively. The car parking proposed is in the form of a basement. It includes 30 car parking spaces and provision for 22 bikes. The land itself is in a commercial zone. It's also in a shop strip which fronts Simpson Street. There is an area of 783 square metres. The application was advertised. 8 objections have been received following that notice. These objections are detailed and summarised on pages 44 and 45 of the officer's report. The application has been assessed as achieving a high level of compliance. Importantly, it does respond favourably to the better apartment provisions which are contained in clause 58. The other supporting features is the planning scheme strategy and the objectives of the commercial 1 zone. With that in mind, the recommendation is that the application be supported with a notice of decision issued. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rudd. I'll now call on Clinton Bartram to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you for your time.
You'll have 5 minutes.
No worries. So, by way of history, we've worked with the Council Planning Officer, Jolyon Boyle, on the project. It was a property which I think, if the council members have been past, would be considered an eyesore. There's a lot of graffiti in what would be described as probably an inactive commercial zone. Once acquiring the site, we did look to extend the existing permit that was there on the back of looking to do an amendment which is now formed part of the new permit application now. The things, I suppose, that we looked at Northcote as an area. For myself, I'm actually a resident of the area and will be moving into this development. So the things that we wanted to make crystal clear in the development were that they were owner-occupier style apartments. The 2-bedders, I think you'll note, are not confined to being 65 square metres. They are predominantly around the 80 square metres, with some being a little bit larger. The 3-bedroom apartments, we've tried to make sure that they've got, I suppose, enough amenity, including the balcony studies, large bedroom storage and whatnot, that as Darren mentioned before, do meet the criteria of the new BADS standards. I think when you look at the site and you break it down into fundamentally where it sits as a development, it is an extremely large site in comparison to what's on that commercial strip there. Predominantly the smaller shop fronts that are single fronting there are about 220 square metres to 280 square metres. The site's considerably bigger, it being 783 square metres. It also has the benefit of being on a corner, which allows us to get enough light penetration into living and bedrooms, which is obviously a massively important factor when developing. So again, we looked at that and thought the area is underutilised. It's close to good transport. There's a train station no more than 100 metres down the road. There's schools, bike paths and also buses. So allowing us to, I suppose, slightly reduce the car parking requirements that were there. The previous permit that was in place there did have a reduction in car parking. I think from memory there was 22 car parks which were approved. For myself, as I said, I plan to live there, so I wanted to make sure that the people that are living there not only respect the site, but they also use their car parking appropriately, because it is surrounded by residential houses which ultimately more often than not have more residents in them. So the car parking was super important to us. The principle behind developing is quality, because fundamentally we look at who's going to buy the property. It's not about fitting as many apartments on as you can, it's finding the people who are happy to pay the prices. And in Northcote, they are a sophisticated buyer. You see neighbouring suburbs like Collingwood and Fitzroy and Richmond, which have really nice developments. And unfortunately, I suppose the further north you go, there hasn't been the same quality of development. So what I suppose we're proposing is to really up the standard, not only in terms of layouts, designs, but in terms of how they're finished, how they're treated. Because fundamentally, when you do live in an apartment complex, your neighbours can either be your best friends or they can be your worst nightmare, depending on how they behave. And without being rude, a lot of the one-bedroom apartments that are around tend to be rental properties, and the smaller two-bedders fundamentally are the same. And people don't treat that with the same respect that they treat their house that they live in. In closing, my preference is obviously to have the development supported on the basis that it is a suitable development for the area in terms of its scale, height, its amenity, and similarly to what Darren said, I think it's one of those sites where it should be developed and it needs to be developed, and that's all from me.
Thank you very much for your submission. You can take your seat back in the gallery. Now we have 3 objectors registered to speak. There's 2 people here now. Is there any particular order you want to come out in? If you.
Can I just clarify though? I had emailed, my name's Cyrilla. I had emailed some renders that I had done of the view of the apartment building from my back living areas. And I don't know if you've had, I noticed they weren't with the agenda. Am I able to?
You can pass them around before you begin to speak if you like. Okay, yep, no, we'll just hand them around the table. Would you like, sorry?
She'll be speaking first. Can I just make another point that's important for her?
Are you speaking after her? Yeah, so we'll hear from is it Ms Jones first, and then I'll call on you. Thank you.
Is this close enough?
Yeah. Yes, thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I was an objector at the last time this was presented, and unfortunately back then there was no opportunity for residents to speak. Since then, obviously the standards have changed. My family have lived in this street for 18 years, as have many of the other residents. We have a connection to the neighbourhood and a strong desire to see development which improves rather than detracts from the unique heritage character of our local area. This development is inappropriate for a number of reasons. Firstly, according to the Darebin Housing Strategy from 2015, this site, although zoned commercial, is directly adjacent to a minimal change area and one that also has a heritage overlay. Clause 21.03 of the Housing Development Policy states that design and development at interfaces between incremental and minimal change areas should provide a sensitive transition, with the layout to avoid unreasonable amenity impacts on adjoining residences due to overshadowing, loss of privacy and an unreasonable visual intrusion, plus a sympathetic response to identified values of any heritage overlays. In relation to the building height, clause 22.06 calls for a consideration of the existing urban context and character objectives of the area to ensure that new development is appropriate to the scale of the nearby streets, other public spaces, protects sunlight access, and off-site amenity impacts should be minimised to unreasonable overshadowing and overlooking adjacent residential properties. This provides the Council with clear direction on the inappropriateness of this development, as the scale, height and bulk is totally out of character and context of the local area, which predominantly is single-storey residential and has a heritage overlay. This building would dominate and dwarf the surrounding dwellings and negatively impact on a residential amenity due to overlooking, overshadowing and visual bulk from the adjoining houses. There are no four-storey buildings in this area outside of the development corridors of High Street and parts of Victoria Road. As you can clearly see from the renders I've provided, for the houses facing and adjacent to the building, there is significant overlooking, with at least 10 balconies and 30 windows directly overlooking these apartments directly into my living area and my backyard. That photo is taken from my dining room. There has been no effort to minimise overlooking of the neighbouring homes. This is unacceptable, as it will significantly impact on our loss of privacy. According to the Darebin Strategic Housing Framework, this site is located within a minimal housing change area which promotes low housing development. Given the commitment the Council has made to ensure development is appropriate and reflective of the community values, I urge the Planning Committee to deny a permit for this development, as a four-storey height is clearly inappropriate for this area. And I haven't got time to mention all the other factors, which will be parking and the increased traffic and noise for local residents. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your submission. Now I'll call on, you must be, Wendy, yep, if you'd like to come forward.
I just wanted to point out that there are in fact 40 objections, some coming in late, but we're advised by councillors that they could be submitted until the meeting.
Yes, yep.
I don't know how many of you know our side of Simpson Street. Simpson Street is split by the railway line, and our northern side, fondly known as Little Simpson Street, is bounded by West Primary School and the Hurstbridge railway line. So I will describe it here to you in the hope you'll understand that it is a residential area and primary school district with a few professional, successful, long-term alternative and architectural small businesses in it. And it is not a commercial activity centre with a few residences in it. Simpson Street started in the 1920s as a small strip of shops similar to those in Wales Street, Thornbury. Our shops plus the application site, which was a bakery, are now all residents, and now all residents bar one are residences. One is now applying to be a residence. Opposite and beside this row of shops are 9 period weatherboards, 2 Art Deco flats and 1 1940s brick home. Currently, Simpson Street has a total of 22 dwellings. This proposed development would add another 19 dwellings plus 2 shops and or a cafe, which is unclear. That is a massive increase of 100% in population and is unsustainable in the complete sense. That's a 100% increase at least in noise and congestion, and the applicant's assessment of an increase of 111 vehicles per day would have a considerable impact on our small street, increasing the dangers of collision with cars, people and school children. The Council very recently approved a 7-dwelling apartment on the corner of South Crescent and Wastel Street. 55 Simpson Street has requested a residential single-storey permit. 58 will soon apply publicly to build 4 apartments, while other residences are likely to add height or apartments to their blocks. Simpson Street and nearby residences are naturally at a pace they can cope with, improving inner city density. However, this huge development threatens to push that to an unmanageable level. This proposed development is totally out of context with the surrounding urban context, nor does it integrate, as is very clearly required by both state and local legislation. This is a sort of building by its design that is actually designed to integrate in High Street or St George's Road, but not here. We have adapted to the gradual increase in density, increased car parking near the station. We use bicycles and now drive at 40 kilometres an hour. But this huge development is asking too much of us. As such, it needs to be made very clear here, I hope, that it needs to be rezoned as other areas have been, that Little Simpson Street is a private residential, small, mixed business area, a primary school district, so that inappropriate developments like this are no longer put forward and aren't necessarily stressing our community and scaring all others in Darebin.
Many thanks for your submission. Councillors, do you have any questions? Oh, hang on just one moment. We've just past 6:30 and our hearing of submissions committee meeting should have begun. So what I'm proposing to do now is to adjourn this meeting so that we can start the committee meeting and then adjourn that meeting and come back to this item. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yep. We're just making sure we get the process right. Okay. Okay, so I can't adjourn the meeting as chair. There needs to be a motion moved to adjourn the meeting.
I'd like to move a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Until, if we say 5 minutes?
6:40.
Yep, okay. So that's moved by Councillor Rennie and seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? The motion is carried. So that planning committee meeting is now adjourned. We'll move now to the hearing of submissions committee. Welcome everybody. I'm sorry that we're running late with our planning committee meeting, but I'll officially open the hearing of submissions committee meeting, but then now call for an adjournment.
I move an adjournment.
And we'll have to also put a time to that. So we'll adjourn the meeting until?
We probably have to say 6:50.
6:50, okay. Is there a seconder? That's seconded by Councillor Newton. All those in favour? That motion is carried. And now we have to wait until 6. You just give us a couple of minutes. Sorry, we're just going to do the little bit of housekeeping we need to prepare the chamber for the hearing of submissions committee while we wait. Okay. So sorry, I'm sorry to keep you waiting on this. We will just have to. We did adjourn the meeting to a specific time, so we'll have to re-adjourn the meeting when that time comes.
6:40.
At 6:40, yeah. Yep.
6:35.
We were too quick in the process.
Is it? Oh, I've seen it. Oh, yes. Yep.
Do you want?
please.
How long are on hold for? 6:40?
2 minutes. We'll just...
Better tell Susan.
Yeah, be fine. In fact, let's hear that. But it's not the same. It's past the plan.
Okay, it's now at 6:40, so we'll start the meeting again. Councillors, are there any questions about this application after we've heard from the applicants and the objectors? Councillor Rennie, do you have a question?
Yes, I have an alternate motion.
Hang on, Councillor Greco, did you have a question?
That's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Councillor Rennie. Oh, hang on, Councillor Messina's got a question.
My question is the size of the allotment on Simpson Street. Could you give me some understanding of the size of that, please?
Yeah, the size of the allotment is 783 square metres, so as the applicant suggests, it's much larger than the other group of shops or former shops.
Okay, there's a motion. Councillor Rennie, could you read out your motion,
Yes.
please?
The motion is that Council refuse the application with grounds as follows. 1. The proposal has not been designed in accordance with Clause 1501, Built Environment of the Darebin Planning Scheme in terms of urban design and building design. 2. The proposal has not been designed in accordance with Clause 2202, Multi-Residential and Mixed-Use Development of the Darebin Planning Scheme in terms of sustainability and design and materials. 3. Apartments 1, 2 and 3 do not comply with standard B48 windows at Clause 550714 of the Darebin Planning Scheme. 4. The car parking spaces and accessways have not been designed in accordance with the requirements of Clause 5206 car parking of the Darebin Planning Scheme. And 5. The proposal does not comply with Clause 2212 ESD policy.
And that's moved by Councillor Rennie, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rennie.
Thank you. I spent quite a lot of time looking at these plans and the plans before that we just considered and thinking about what's the difference between these two lots of plans, both proposing a mixed-use development in a commercial zone. I think we can see partly that the difference is in how much is trying to be jammed onto this site, which is half the size of the previous site. And here there are 19 dwellings proposed, whereas the last one proposed 8. And I think that speaks volumes to everything that is wrong about this development. But more particularly, when I looked at the first page, ground floor of this development, and saw that there were a number of apartments that had ground floor frontage that made no use of that ground floor frontage, that had windows in a battle axe arrangement where the depth of those windows was some 3 metres or so, I thought this is not adequate, this is simply not good enough, and we must expect better. And if those apartments comply with the Better Apartment guidelines, then there's something very wrong with those guidelines. I don't know how anyone could think it was okay to have to drag their queen-size mattress through an entry, into a lift, up the lift, into their apartment, and then down the staircase to get back to the ground floor, which is where they could have started if they'd had an entry from there. If we want dwellings to have a sense of entrance and place in a street, then we should give them an entry from the street and actually design them in such a way that they can be part of a neighbourhood. So I had some very serious concerns when I looked at the design. I don't believe the plans were good enough in terms of actually conveying to us the quality that has been spoken about. I don't see it when I look at the plans. And I don't think adequate use has been made of the site, particularly the fact that many of these dwellings have no natural light coming in from the north at all, because the building makes no use of the northern side in terms of light penetration into that building, and that means many of these dwellings would be very dark and unpleasant. So there are a number of reasons why I feel that this is inadequate, and I urge you all to support the motion to refuse the application.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Councillor Rennie has covered off the main arguments in relation to the inadequacy of this proposal. I would just note that having been through the earlier incarnation of a proposed development on this site and having pushed for refusal at that stage, which was, I think, ultimately overturned at VCAT, I'm surprised by what's come back to us, because it doesn't seem to have picked up on some of those issues that Councillor Rennie has referred to in terms of the quality of design, access and entry. This development could find a place with some changes on a high street. And I think that was picked up by some of the objectors. But we're not talking about High Street here. We're talking about Simpson Street, Northcote. And for those councillors that have been to the street, you'd know it as a small street with a village feel around it, with obviously the school. So context is important, but also internal amenity of the site is also critically important. And whilst I appreciate the analysis of the applicant in saying that they've thought about who's going to live here, I don't think I'd want to live in a situation where I have to make those sorts of manoeuvres with my mattress up and down the stairs and the elevator. So I think we need to be realistic about what we're building and the appropriateness, not just the external built form, but also the internal built form. And on that one, on this basis, and on that point, I can't support what's before us at the moment, and would encourage rethink, probably more along the lines of what we just had proposed in Reservoir, something a bit more to scale and synthetic and sympathetic to the community.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
I have a question,
yes,
Mayor, if I may. I just wanted to understand, there's a 4-storey development proposal here, what the height limit for that particular area is?
Mr. Rudd.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's actually no height limit specified for the commercial zone or this site. All there is...
could you speak up, please?
There is no height limit for the commercial zone in this location.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers to the motion? No? I'll put that motion...
I'd like to speak in relation to the motion.
Councillor Greco.
Yeah. Look, I support the motion that's been put forward to reject the application, and I think Councillor Rennie has articulated well all the internal design issues associated with this particular application. Notwithstanding that there aren't any height limits, that the developers could go, essentially as high as they want. I think we have to be appreciative that it is it's not High Street, as Councillor McCarthy said, and it is within the within the heart of that West Garth area. As a little side note, I went to the local primary school there, the West Garth Primary School, so I know that area really, really well in terms of its look and its feel. And precisely on that, there are a couple of buildings across the road from that site that actually have a heritage overlay associated with them. So a building of this size and of this bulk, I think would really sort of impact the area in quite a substantial manner, where you have 4 stories around that area. It's predominantly 1 stories, and there are occasional 2-story buildings that have been renovated in recent time. But having that sort of scale, that sort of height, that sort of bulk will create all the problems that has been articulated by our residents in relation to overlooking, and I don't think that they would be appropriate. So I support it. I think there's a lot of similarities between this particular application, even though that it's in Northcote, with the previous application that we had looked at earlier on in Reservoir, and that unfortunately that was not supported. But in this particular case, I think that that there are grounds both from an external amenity perspective and also from an external perspective of not supporting this particular application.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I just think it's really important to highlight the difference between the first application and this one. First of all, the size is double. It's half the size of the previous application in terms of land size, and the visual bulk is much more in this particular application than the first one. And the internal amenity is different. So it's important for the people that are listening to look at both applications, and they're probably asking the question, why are we approving one over the other in terms of the commercial zone? And I think that's they're the highlights that I want to put forth, and for the viewers to listen to that information and make that recommendation based on those differences. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. So the Planning Committee has decided to refuse the planning permit. The applicant has 60 days to appeal this decision to VCAT. A notice detailing tonight's decision and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant over the next week. Item 6 is other business. There is no other business. Is there any urgent business? No. So we'll close the Planning Committee meeting at 6:49. Thank you for those who stayed to the end. Councillors, don't go anywhere because we'll be starting the meeting very soon.
Herding sheep, Kim, isn't it?